I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Mark Henderson. Mark is a former competitive swimmer. He is an Olympic gold medalist, three-time world champion, and former world record holder. After his competitive swimming career, Mark went on to work on Wall Street and then started a nonprofit, the Athletes Village. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Start off this conversation with an inspirational quote or saying that maybe has given you a little motivation these days.
My inspirational quote for everyone would be, you have to do the things others won't do to have the things others only dream of.
I love it. Yeah, that definitely gets this conversation started right. I appreciate that. After your career as an Olympic athlete and Wall Street investor, which we'll definitely talk about those things, you co-founded the Athletes Village. For our listeners who maybe haven't heard of the Athletes Village, what is it? What is the Athletes Village?
Well, it started out as just a frustration of mine and a lot of my friends that needed to be solved. And that frustration was that it wasn't easy to give back as a pro athlete. I could go give clinics, but that meant that I had to fly somewhere and hang out for a couple hours, especially when I was still training, which was really hard to put in the schedule. So I wanted something that we could build that would be nice and easy for people to give back. We built the first generation about 2 years ago of this, and now we're building the second generation of it as an app for your phone. But the first generation, when we released it, we had over 600 pro athletes and sports experts join within the first 8 months.
Wow.
So we had a lot of interest in it, and we also had users in to date, we have users in over 42 countries.
The thing that jumps off to me is getting, that 800 athletes and trainers and all of those people. So what did you do? How did you go about getting all of that buy-in?
We worked two avenues, really. We have a lot of connections on LinkedIn, so we put out a few posts regarding the Athletes Village. But also, I think word of mouth was big, and athletes are very competitive, and so when they see their friends doing something, they're like, "Wait a minute, what was that? Like, what were they doing?" And people are complimenting them for giving back and that type of thing. Then the other athletes tend to jump on and participate. So, and one other thing we found was that when athletes were involved on it, and they came organically, we would try to approach them and just ask them to throw a few of the responses they had on the site onto their social media, and we built a function for that. So, that was big too, because some of these guys have 400,000 to 1 million followers.
Now, your background's in swimming, and this app isn't just for swimmers. It's for all sorts of athletes. So as you're building it, as you have built it and continue to build it, how have you gone about making this a personalized experience for all of these diverse athletes?
Well, we wanted it. I mean, the whole goal of it was to be a personalized experience. I mean, the big
Yeah.
complaint pro athletes have when they give clinics is that they really feel like they're kind of broad brushing their
Hmm.
advice and not really helping anybody specifically.
Yeah.
So we really wanted you to, for instance, to be able to go on there and ask a question that could help you personally.
Yeah.
You're trying to break a certain minute mile and you're hitting a roadblock, or your nutrition is failing you, or
Okay.
you just decide to become vegan or vegetarian, like what type of protein sources can you have. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of ability there to, and if the question is very personal and you could be embarrassed asking it, we made it so you could ask questions anonymously as well.
So what makes this unique than, let's say, a little group on LinkedIn or your Twitter groups or Facebooks or all of these different groups that are out there? What makes Athletes Village different, better, unique than those?
I think it's different because it's attracting a ton of pro athletes, right? Like
Mm.
LinkedIn or Instagram is
Yeah.
very individual, back and forth
Hmm.
questions. And, when you DM somebody on Instagram, there's two things that are not happening. For the pro athlete, they're not being recognized for giving back. So it's not
Oh,
helping them build their brand. There's typically a
sure.
DM question that comes into them and then they respond and no one else
Yeah.
sees it. With the
Hmm.
newer version that we have, as soon as it's all video, first of all. So if you can imagine, like you go on there and ask a basketball question, and then you get a response from a pro basketball player walking down the streets of New York,
Oh, cool.
on a video. And as soon as he clicks send to send a response, it pings everybody that is following basketball on the site, but it also
Wow.
automatically goes to both our social media sites and whatever social media sites the athlete who responded clicked
Hmm.
on. So it could go to all of his, or just his, or hers, just her Facebook, her Instagram, you
Oh,
name
wow.
it. So it's pretty cool because it's
Yeah.
going out there and branding directly to a huge audience.
Now, this new version, is it in beta? Is it live? What's the update with that?
Yeah, we plan on releasing it about a month before the Olympics. So
Okay.
we have a lot of athletes who are looking forward to talking about it. A lot of them have
Hmm.
talked to me and said, we just can't wait to talk about something other than ourselves. They've kind of, run out of conversation, like it'd be fun to talk about something that is helping people on a global basis.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so that's the professional athlete side. And then you have a user. You have a high school kid, loves basketball,
Yep.
wants to learn from a professional basketball player. He's on it. How does that person go about getting on the Athletes Village? One, how do they go about, I guess signing up is pretty easy, but what are the details with pricing and those sorts of structures?
Completely free.
Oh, wow.
So 100% free. We're not here to make revenue. We're a
Okay.
nonprofit. We have been, we've received offers to sell the company,
Yeah, I bet you
but
have.
we're kind of sticking to our guns. I'm not going to say any names, but a lot of the big companies that have these home smart
Hmm.
speakers have
Yeah.
offered to buy our content so that you could wake up in the morning and say, hey, blah blah blah, give me some swimming tips, or give
Wow.
me some running tips, or give me some inspirational quotes, and you would have
Mhm.
hopefully a mega superstar sports athlete respond.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment. So I'm sure you're debating that, right? As they're coming to you. Obviously, money's always a lure, but
Yeah.
I'm also wondering if, okay, on one side it's, well, I could have a bigger reach, right? I could get to more people. But then on this other side, well, I want it to be an intimate, authentic experience under the athletes village. How are you interacting with that?
Well, it's grown over the past 2 years to
Hmm.
become a nonprofit. We started
Yeah.
out as a corporation,
Okay.
and I was on Wall Street. I knew a lot of the investment bankers. I knew, I dealt in that area, and so I knew a lot of the VCs. But I didn't want to go down the road of having to produce revenue, because the first year and a half, it really closed a lot of doors for us. Like we go in
Hmm.
and have these great talks with Nike or Under Armour or Dick's Sporting Goods, all these main brands that are trying to keep
Yeah.
kids in sports. And as soon as we got to the point of like, you guys are a corporation, and we're, yeah, well, how are you making revenue? And so we're talking about subscription models and all this stuff, and all of a sudden you could see their excitement start to
Mm.
wane. And so we realized that the heart and soul of this is to make it a nonprofit and just
Okay.
a simple platform to give back.
Yeah, it's super unique and super needed. I'm sure there's tons of, professional athletes that are getting a lot out of giving back, and then obviously the young athletes or athletes trying to make it, just receiving, all of that information and guidance and mentorship as well.
It's typically a one-way conversation, right? It's typically the
Yeah.
pro athletes telling you, here's how you should dribble, here's how you should do this, here's how you should do that.
Mm.
Well, it's different because we kind of flipped it and
Yep.
enable people like, hey, I tried your masterclass video, but I'm still having problems doing X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
So now they're asking the question of how do you get past certain technique problems they're having?
Yeah.
And it could be timing, it could be, just a simple technique mistake they're making. So it's much more of a personal experience that can typically affect thousands of people. We're just kind of trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned the Athletes Village, is across many different countries, different cultures, different communities. How have you gone about, building community across, all of these different countries, communities, cultures, in this virtual setting?
Well, we've done our best with the first version, we worked really hard to be involved in the community. So all of us, there's 5 of us working here. All of us were on, you know, one of us was on at any hour of the day.
Okay.
And we were making sure that the conversations and the responses and the questions and all of that, were of the utmost like safe, like people felt safe. There wasn't aggression, because when you bring something that people are passionate about, they can tend to be very aggressive
Hmm.
of standing behind their beliefs.
Yeah.
You do have the parents who believe they need to be like Tiger Woods' dad, and then you have the parents who believe, you need to be like Peyton Manning's dad.
Mm.
They're very separate ways to bring up a kid in sports.
Yeah.
Peyton played multiple sports, didn't play tackle until high school. Tiger was handed a golf club when he was like 4 months old. So
Hmm.
it's definitely people trying. Some people are on there trying to fight for, to kind of prove what they're doing is right.
Yeah, another thing that jumps out is this is a different sort of learning, right? You're taking technology and utilizing it for a transformative learning experience, for a transformative interaction that really couldn't have happened without it, right? Without technology. And that's exciting. And a hot topic right now in education is hybrid learning. An athlete teaching kids live at a clinic, and then there's people streaming in at the same time. So that's what I mean by that hybrid learning experience.
Yep.
Is the Athletes Village doing anything like that?
Yes, there is a void that we are looking to fill in terms of a lot of these big brand names like Nike that have summer camps. Right?
Yes.
So they have like a summer lacrosse camp, but they don't talk to their attendees all year until the camp happens again.
Mhm.
So they're looking for us to be the middleman, where that keeps enhances that conversation and communication between the camp attendees and the experts that are there teaching the kids, so that they
Hmm.
can talk year round and they can ask questions and they can, keep progressing, through their sport.
What has worked well as you guys are sort of delving into the hybrid learning? I'm asking that because one of the number one things on teachers' mind, there's a lot of teachers listening into this podcast right now. A number one thing is hybrid learning, right? It's difficult, it's new, they've never done it before. So we're sort of, all right, we want to learn from you and what you're finding out that has been successful for you.
God, since COVID, our numbers have been way up, and I think one of
Hmm.
the main reasons is because parents and teachers have been looking for a way to get their kids to exercise, and a lot of teams haven't been having practice.
Yep.
So that applied to the pro athletes as well, especially the
Yep.
Olympic athletes. So, younger athletes were looking to see what they were doing during this time. So, having that communication and having that ability to find out what to do, what's something fun I can do with my family or my kids or by
Mm.
myself if I'm a lacrosse player to stay in shape.
Yeah.
So that's the type of information we started really focusing on.
Yeah.
And we also a lot of the topics, a lot of the subcategories on our site grow organically. And the biggest and the highest performing subcategory on our site is sports parenting.
Hmm.
So that is something that has organically grown over the past year dramatically. And we're getting a couple thousand people like looking at those categories a day. Um, and so, yeah, so I think that is probably one of the biggest opportunities we have because there's just not many support groups for parents out there. And I think it's, obviously the lowest hanging fruit
Mm-hmm.
because you never see interviews with LeBron James's mom on how she raised them, or Drew Brees's mom or mom and dad on how they raised him and how they got through certain decision making. Kids dropping out of sports is the age is dropping lower and lower and lower. So, a couple of years ago, the average age of kids dropping out of sports was 13. Now it's 11. And they say the number one reason is because of the parents. There's definitely things to be learned. And, people are getting a little bit crazy about making their kids specialize at such a young age, which
Mm-hmm.
increases burnout and injuries and all kinds of negative attributions that I didn't have to deal with when I was growing up. I played multiple sports all the way up through my senior year in high school.
So thinking about this virtual learning, experience, right? What's a big obstacle that you're trying to figure out right now that, it's a problem and you guys are sort of collaborating, okay, we got to figure this out. This isn't working, this isn't working. What's an issue with this virtual learning environment?
I'd say the biggest issue is
Mm,
motivating kids instead of people just coming to us when they have a problem, like wanting to come to us, incentivizing them to come to us to improve. Because sports becomes fun, education becomes fun when you're improving, right? And you're doing well. I grew up with a teacher who, education was first, way ahead of sports. And if I didn't hold a certain grade point average, or if she saw my grades dropping in school, my sports, started to dwindle in terms of her letting me go. So, yeah, I think it's just motivating the kids, and that's what we've been
mm,
working on. And that's with version 2. We're doing a lot of, you know, awarding points, having leaderboards, getting other nonprofits involved, and when you get a certain amount of points, you can use those points to buy other things on the site like autographs from athletes, or you can use those
mm,
points to donate them for cash towards a charity. So,
yeah.
teaching kids empathy and that type of thing.
Mm,
So, we're trying to get them to come back to, incentivize them to come back to do certain things to get those points, whether it's activity, exercise,
mm-hmm.
that they send a video in showing that they've done, 50 push-ups or whatever. But that's what we're kind of beta testing right now.
Okay. Yeah, I just had a conversation, episode 31, with Sean Kanungo, and he said, if you're not gamifying your classroom, and he's not an educator, he's a disruption innovation specialist. We were talking about education, and he was saying, if you're not gamifying your classroom, you're sort of not relevant. Everything's a game
Yeah,
for them, and it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're gamifying the experience of your app to bring increased motivation. Is that kind of what you were going for?
exactly. I agree with him 100%. I think
Mm,
that's a very smart way to look at it. I think we were always incentivized in one way or another in my
yeah.
family to achieve things. And, I think that works really well, especially with kids these days. I mean,
Mm.
my son will do X, Y, and Z to get his skin for a video game. And, you know, so it's one of those things where I actually have a really good story in that regard. He was, trying out lacrosse for the first time a couple years ago, and he was young, and he would look like he was kind of lost out there and didn't want the contact. And we limit his video games. He can only play on the weekends, but he absolutely loves video games. And so I told him he could get this certain. So before the game, I made the mistake of saying, I'll get you this certain skin if you get a certain amount of points during the game. And points being, if you're the first guy to the ball, you get 3 points. If you pass the ball and someone scores, you get 2 points. If you score, you only get 1 point. But, I was making it so it wasn't like he was like a ball hog or anything like that. More like, just want aggression. That's it. I just want you to go out there and run and not be like completely like looking at the sky. And so the kid went nuts. He was like a maniac on the field and just, chasing the ball around like a dog that just can't drop a ball, like a lab. And so afterwards, the coach and some of the parents came up and they were just like, "Oh my God, your son was on fire today!" Wow. And I was just sitting there going, "Oh my God, I'm such a bad parent." One of my best moments, I'm like, that's totally unsustainable. I can't like go to every game, like I'll be poor by the time the season's over. So yeah, but that's an example, an extreme example, but and not something I'm suggesting to do as a parent. But I think kids have been, kind of growing up in this kind of valley where in the games that they play, they're awarded for a certain amount of game time play.
Yeah. Let's reflect on that a moment, because, any parents listening, want us to pause and think about this a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you're sort of reflecting afterwards and thinking about it. And my question for you is this, and I'm thinking about this as well. So these motivation strategies are really powerful, right? You saw it with your son. We see it in the games. It's not always bad. So how do we balance this? And we don't have to talk about this too long, but how do we balance this? What did you think about between this motivation, the power of motivation, the power of these things, which aren't necessarily bad, and then building intrinsic motivation within your child or within your student? How do we go about doing that? Because if we don't hold out rewards, we might not get the student or our child or our athlete to do anything, right? Sometimes we need to like spark them a little bit, but then we don't want them just, chasing after the thing day after day after day. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an incredibly interesting conversation. It can go down many rabbit holes. I think that, on one hand, it's extremely important to recognize kids when they do something well. And that's probably the hardest thing teachers are having to deal with right now, is that when somebody's doing really well in a class, it's hard to recognize them on a video chat, And so in a classroom, you can simply like walk up to them and be like, "Johnny, that was such a great art project you did. I'm really proud of you. It looks like you put a lot of time into it." And that makes all the difference in the world, because you're just all of a sudden you just want that dopamine hit, right? Like you want to please that teacher because you could be recognized. Same thing with sports. I mean, when I say parents are the number one reasons kids quit sports, one of the worst things parents do, and I try to compare it to education all the time when I talk to them, is, watch any soccer game of kids under the age of 14, and parents are yelling and screaming and telling their kids what to do. And I try to bring them back a level and say, okay, look at how you reacted during a soccer game. And then would you do the same thing for your kids when they're doing math homework? You wouldn't say like 6 + 8, like carry the 1. Like, what are you doing? God, just do it. Like you wouldn't do that. Like it's a completely different. Like parents have a completely different mindset when it comes to sports than they do education. And if I was to say to my son, we were just working on math before this, and I say, "Oh my God, that was great," or, "Oh, you just about had it. You just, right, look at this part of it again. I think you just had a little miss up here. And, oh, that's awesome." Like you get that, all of a sudden he's excited to do the next thing, right? If I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting there going like, oh, I can't believe you messed up again.
Yeah.
Like, come on, and that's where you can see major differences. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why teachers are having such a hard time. Is it's really hard to, recognize people when they're doing well. And that's what we're trying to do with the newer version of the app is,
Yeah.
enable kids to, update their emoji or update, get different skins for
Mm-hmm.
their profile picture, when they get to different levels of points, which, different level of points are, gained by sharing on social media or asking a question or recognizing someone for answering your question, or, or doing a physical activity. So, there's one of my son's teachers really stood out to me in terms of going above and beyond, but actually motivating these kids. And she took the time to call them individually once a week and really recognize, there's
Mm-hmm.
30 kids in the class. So this is time consuming. But
Yes.
she would call them during the week and say, oh my God, I just want to recognize you for, you're being seen, you're being heard. And,
Wow.
I saw on your quiz that you had really put some time in, and I just want to tell you, I really appreciate that. And so, my son wants to do good in that class.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that example too. I appreciate that. And that's really helpful for me to hear. That's helpful for our listeners because sometimes we get bogged down in the technology, in the tools, right? They have this, I have this isn't working. But it didn't take a whole lot for that teacher to reach out to every student every week and recognize them and have a quick conversation or just recognize them in front of the group. And I sort of jotted down as you were talking, just trying to get some of these gems and bring it to another context. And I was just like, recognition plus gamification, equals motivation. And we can apply that. You're applying that, and we can apply that to many different avenues. And one of the avenues that you've worked with is working with athletes and military professionals, especially when you were on Wall Street, and bringing them in and training them and bringing them right in to succeed. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, coming on to Wall Street, I did many different positions during my career, but I was one of those traders that you saw on the trading floor, yelling and screaming and doing all the craziness. But I was so lucky because I had mentors in the business who were either ex-athletes or just took the time to learn how I did well, in business. And a good example would be, if I had an athlete as an employee, and I said, hey, here's A, I want you to get to Z, ready, go.
Mm,
They would stumble. They would, wouldn't ask for help because it kind of kicks their pride.
yeah.
They haven't been trained to do that, and they wouldn't do well. If I said, here's A, I want you to get to Z. Here's the things you need to do to get to Z. They would crush it, and they would do it
Mm,
better and faster than anybody else
mm,
because that's how they were trained for all those years of their life. They had a coach who would say, here's practice, here's what I need you to do, and they would do it better than anybody else in practice, which moved them up through the ranks and eventually got them to the college level, right? But then all of a
mm,
sudden you put them in the business world and you're like, here's A, here's Z, bye, go. And they have no idea what to do, even if
mm.
they're really well educated. So for me, I specialized in, I really put an emphasis on hiring ex-athletes, ex-college athletes, and military personnel because I knew that they could crush it in a pressure situation. And
Yeah.
believe me, we were in a lot of pressure situations, especially with a couple market collapses,
Mm,
that I lived through. And as long as I knew how to get the most out of them, our teams always performed extremely well, and they were really tight knit
mm.
versus the backstabbing nature that most of Wall Street has a bad history of.
Yeah. So how did you build that tight knit environment, a tight knit culture with you and all of your workers?
I took away personal benefits and made them team benefits. So we had to perform to a certain level as a team for people to get bonuses. So when I came on the team, when I came on to JP Morgan and had my own team eventually, I changed that aspect that, people tend to argue about.
Yeah, I'm sure some people thought that at the beginning. How did you get buy-in from, them to go with that team concept?
Yeah, there was definitely a handful of people that, hated it because they said, "Oh, I'm just not going to work as hard because I'm going to get," but I had to show them and prove to them that they could actually get a higher payout during bonus time as a team, and that it was much easier instead of being through the exhausting, constant arguments of who takes credit for what account that three people are on and who should get the most credit for it.
Yeah.
So that's just exhausting, and it's something
Mhm.
that's inbred in the business. And for us, it was, once I took that away from them, they had to work together to get to another level. But once they saw that they could reach bonuses that they had never received before,
Mm.
then, it became exciting.
Yeah, that's cool how you set up a new system to build community. And then you also, took time to show them like the increased reward that they'll be able to get in this new community. But without setting up a new system, it would have never happened. And without creating a new reward system, would have never happened either. Yeah, that's really interesting and inspiring. In 1996 at the Olympics, you won a gold medal. It's taken us a while to get to that. Obviously, that just doesn't happen, right? There were some significant events that helped you get to the gold. I'm sure you've been asked this a lot. You reflect on this. What were some of the most significant events that helped you get to that gold at the 96 Olympics?
It was definitely a team effort.
Mm.
I would never say, and I was on a relay, right? So I just had to hold on to a lead for my dear life. But um, it was, I would say the big things that stand out when I look back are, number one, my parents. They were extremely supportive, never pitted me against anybody. The biggest thing they did that enabled my success was that I never felt like I had to win to control their emotions, right?
Mm.
Like you see a lot of parents just go crazy on the sidelines, whether
Yeah.
their kids win or lose, like hands in the head if they lose, or like
Hmm.
over celebrating when they win. And society pushes that, right? Like
Yep.
society will walk up to the quarterback's parents and be like, "Oh my God, he had a great day today. That's so awesome." And that's like an adrenaline, to the parent, right? Like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I've got to make sure that my son has a great game next week," and blah, 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 and so it's just this treadmill of just negativity in a way that's not helping anybody. I mean, the parents really didn't have anything to do with it, to be honest with you.
Right.
So my parents, they were pretty neutral. Like, whether I won or lost, it wasn't, they had an uncanny way of making me feel that it didn't matter if I won or lost. It's just that I achieved my goals. Like I tried my hardest that day and
Mm.
I achieved what I was out there to do. And if I didn't have a good day, like what did I learn from it?
Yeah.
So that in turn enabled me to try new things to be better, right? So I could experiment, like I could be ranked number one in the state and be competing in a state championship. But my coach is like, "Hey, I really want you to try a different breathing pattern today. Or
Mm.
I want you to try more underwater kicks, before you pop up. And let's see how that works out." And if it doesn't work out, like I didn't feel like I was disappointing my parents because I
Yeah.
didn't win. There's a lot of kids out there that won't try new things because what they do is working at the time and they don't want to disappoint their parents. They don't want to have to
Mm.
walk back to them and explain what happened. So that was the positive thing on the parent side. My coach was extremely influential in making it so that he everything was fun. Everything, he was ahead of his time. Everything was like race based, so he was trying to recreate what it's like to be up on the blocks and ready to race when I was like 10. So
Mm.
he would recreate meets all the time, in practice where we'd all jump up on the blocks and do, a couple all out sprints almost every day, just so that we were comfortable in that situation. So, it was more of just trying to put us in a situation where when we got to the most nerve-wracking situation in a competition, we would be calm.
Yeah.
As you can be. So, and then I would say a lot of it is due to my teammates. Like, they pushed me. I went to Cal. I wasn't the best guy there. Like, there was a lot of guys that were way better than me. And so I really had to work my way up through that program to get better. Like, I just saw guys that trained way better than I did and way harder than I did. And they taught me I needed to be at a certain level to achieve greatness in sports. But, and teachers, that taught me discipline. And, I was just lucky all the way around. I was extremely lucky to have very positive people around me.
As you think about those Olympic Games, even now, and getting that gold medal, what's a memory that remains imprinted in your mind?
Ironically, I would say not making the team, the Olympics before.
I was actually going to ask you about this, Mark, because I've heard you tell this story. It's really powerful. This is a perfect segue.
Yeah, it's probably the story that most of the kids want to hear. It's kind of funny.
They know about it?
Yeah, a lot of kids, when I go give talks, or they'll look me up on Wikipedia or something, and they'll say like, "Yeah, I heard you broke the world record in the relay, but what happened in '92?" So
wow. Okay.
It was. I'll try to make it as brief as possible.
No, don't. I love this story. I didn't know about it. I'm not a huge swimming. I don't follow everything, but when I've heard you tell it, there's so much to learn from that story. So please take your time.
Yeah, and I think it applies to education in a big way, right? So, and it helped me in education when I was at Cal. So in '92, I was ranked second in the world. I was the number one butterflyer in the U.S. And Olympic trials is a prelim and a final. And in prelims and in finals, it's only the top two that go. It doesn't matter if you're the current American or world record holder. If you're not in the top two at finals Olympic trials, you don't go. So it's kind of cutthroat, and probably it's harder. I think Olympic trials is harder than the Olympics. Like, when you get to the Olympics, you're like, now I just get to race. Like, it's like exciting. But at Olympic trials, I swam in the morning session. And my coach would whistle for me to back off, just so I had enough left at night. I didn't deplete the reserve tanks. So I'm swimming, having a great race. I feel almost effortless. The crowd is going crazy, like much louder than normal. And I'm like, what is going on? And about from the flags to the wall, about, last 5 to 10 meters, I hear my coach whistle. And so I just kind of shut it down a little bit. And when I hit the wall, the crowd goes, "Oh!" And I was like, "What?" And so I look up. I'm like, did I get DQ'd? Because it was like not a good cheer. It was like, "Oh, darn it!" And I look up at the clock, and I had just missed the world record by like 8/100ths of a second.
Oh wow!
So, I go into the night in the finals seated first by a good amount, and the guys who were on both sides of me were actually my idols in swimming. So it was Matt Biondi, and the current American record holder Pablo Morales was on the other side. And I knew that they took it out really fast. And I typically am like middle of the pack at the halfway point, and then I hit the wall and I try to run people down on the back end. But for one reason or another, I still can't really explain it. And my coach always shakes his head about this, but I thought about it. I'm in the ready room, which is a room they have us in before we parade out for the finals. And I'm looking at these two guys. I'm like, I know I'm going to be way behind. I'm probably going to be at their knees at the halfway point, and just wrapping my head around that, feeling, so I'm not freaked out about it. But something in my head said, just get out in front of them. They're in front of them, they're going to be so mind-crimed. They're going to be so messed up seeing me ahead of them because they've never seen it. that they're going to freak out. So something in me agreed that was a great thing to do. And so, they started us. I dove in, first at the halfway point by, I'd say, like a half body length. And I hit the wall and I'm coming off, and the crowd is out of control. And I can hear the announcers saying, he's way ahead of world record pace and blah, 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 like yelling, and the crowd's going crazy. And they flip. The classic thing is the NBC flips to my coach, and you see my coach, and he's got his hands on both sides of his head with this shocked look. Not excited, more like, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, who is this guy? And, I'm going down the pool, and I'd say within 10 meters of the wall, the first piano landed on my back. Then about 2 more strokes later, I could barely get my arms out of the water.
Oh my goodness.
So I went from first to 7th in 5 meters and didn't make the team. And my time from the morning session would have medaled at the Olympics. So, yeah, that was a hard one to swallow. But the one thing I had remembered was Michael Jordan came and gave a talk to one of the national teams I was on before that. And he had said something that really struck me, and it seems simple, but not many people do it. And he said, what separates the good from the great is that the great become fanatic about their worst performances. So he said, he's like, look, I lost as many games as I won in the final seconds. He goes, but you don't really hear about those. And he goes, when I did miss that shot in the final seconds, I would stay after and do that exact same shot like 500 times. No exaggeration. I would keep doing it, take a break, keep doing it until I knew that I knew what to do in that situation. Like if that situation happened again and I'm right there, that's what I would do. And so, when I got back home, I had a choice. It was like retire. And an Olympic athlete, it's hard because it's either retire or go 4 more years. So thought about it for a while and just decided, like, you know what, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to make sure that I don't make the same mistake. I'm going to train my body to swim like I should have swam that race. And I'm just going to go all chips in. So in 96, when I raced again at trials, I actually came in the night seated 7th, and it was the tightest heat in the history of Olympic trials for the U.S. Wow. I think between 1st and 8th was like 0.4 of a second. Yeah. So, we were all coming to the wall pretty much the same time, right? And so when I hit the wall at the halfway point, I was in last place. And this time NBC flipped and showed my parents in the stands, and they were going crazy. You wouldn't have thought that I was in last place. Like they were like all jumping up, like excited. And my coach was excited. And then, I ran everybody down at the last 5-10 meters and made the team.
What did we learn from that wonderful story?
The biggest thing I learned was, first of all, you can't control other people. So, in school and in education, I was pre-med in college, and I was often worried about what my class rank was and what other people were doing and how much they were studying versus how much I was studying. And that's just a waste of time and energy, really, to be honest with you. I think the one thing that I always teach my kids is just stay in your lane. Like, do what you need to do to get the best out of yourself. Don't worry about anybody else. You never know what other people are going to do. You never know how they're going to perform, whether it's in school or anywhere else. Just stay in your lane and do what you have to do. Don't waste energy worrying about other people. The other thing is, it's incredibly important to learn from your mistakes. Like you get like if I got a bad grade in a subject, I would typically take it to my teacher and be like, you know what, I studied, I just don't get, why I missed X, Y, and Z, or why I got this grade. Like, I can't get grades like this. Like, I just, and the teacher would not only have more respect for you and more empathy towards you being a good student, but they would typically give you some insight on how you could study better and more effectively. So, for me, a lot of kids I see in sports to this day, when they have a bad competition, or even at school, you see the same thing, but in a bad competition, you see kids, get upset. They throw their goggles down, they stomp off, they go in the corner, they don't talk to the coach. So what are they getting from that? Nothing. They still got more races to do that day.
Yeah.
And where do you think they're going to do? So to me, when I had a bad race, the first thing I did was to walk over to my coach when it was still fresh in his mind and still fresh in my mind, and run over the race and be like, what did you see here? How did you feel here? And then we could kind of grind it out and figure out what went wrong. Same thing with school. Like, when I got a bad grade, I wouldn't pout and hate the teacher and blame everybody and all that. I didn't have enough time to study and blah, blah, blah. It was more like, all right, I'm going to figure out what the heck I did wrong. Like, this is not acceptable. So, it was more of a teaching experience. I actually probably got more out of my bad races and bad exams than I did out of the other side of it, having a great race or, good grades.
Another thing that comes out to me is the idea of perseverance, right? You had to look at what was ahead of you. It was 4 years, like you said, and then you went for it and you actually persevered, towards that end. And that's difficult to do, right? What do you think helped you persevere towards your next goal, even after that, that disruption, or that, some people would say failure, or whatever, however you would define that. But what helped you persevere?
I was actually more dangerous after not making the Olympic team, because everything I feared about not making the team didn't come true. So I'm like, God, if I don't make the team, I'm going to lose all my sponsors, and I'm going to have to quit swimming, and my parents are going to be disappointed, and my friends and everybody who wanted to go to the Olympics, like, they all were planning to go, and like, what's going to happen with their tickets, and da 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 da, like, all this pressure that I didn't realize was on me was internal, and it didn't happen. Like, some of my sponsors, got rid of me. That is true. But I didn't fall into financial ruin. I didn't, have to quit swimming. I still had a decision. My parents were not disappointed in me at all. They were excited that I was brave enough to step up on the blocks and race, at Olympic trials, and that I had made it that far. So, all of those things that I was so fearful of, all of a sudden I wasn't fearing anymore. It was like, it's like people who kind of cheat death, and they, they say that they see the other side, and it's amazing and that type of thing. Like, they enjoy life way better. Right. So, for me, all of a sudden I was like deadly. Like, I had the best races of my life after that. And I could recover quickly from bad races because I just wasn't as fearful.
I want to pause this podcast for a moment to let you know about another great podcast.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Dunn, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Rethinking EDU. Our podcast is a roundtable discussion about education possibility. We talk with professionals from around the country who are doing groundbreaking work reimagining and remaking schools. Come check us out at rethinkingedu.co or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, thanks for that reminder of that. That's really helpful. Sometimes when we're in the midst of something, we can't see what it's like on the other side. And oftentimes it's not what we envision, right? And that example is really helpful. Mark, this has been so great talking with you today. As we wind things down, who do you want to give a shout out to?
I just want to give a shout out to my national team friends, and a shout out to the guys that are trying out for Olympic trials in the next month for the U.S. team. I know that they've been put through the ringer with COVID and been delayed, and had to really show some resolve, like you said earlier, to stick with it. So I just want to tell them that, no matter what happens, still love them, and I'm excited to watch them race.
Time for the final word. What would you like to say to close out this podcast?
Hey, any dream is achievable, and when you have down moments, just look at them and try to learn from them, and you're going to come out on the right side of the equation.
Mark, thank you for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. I appreciate your time, sharing your experiences, and helping us dive deep. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.